Professor Meerts, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
You have contributed a really interesting chapter to this book on negotiations, focusing on entrapment. Could you maybe explain the concept?
Well, entrapment is can be used as a tactic for weaker parties. So let's say Taliban entrapped NATO or the US in Afghanistan. And the point with entrapment is that the bigger party, thinking that they will win over the smaller party, pushes itself on the smaller party. But if the smaller party withdraws into a certain direction in such a way that it will gain situational power, well, the bigger party, although it has more structural power, will lose situational power. At a certain moment, the bigger party cannot move anymore. It's in the tunnel. And that's the moment where the weaker party will be successful. So we have several of these examples. For example, the United States in Vietnam, or the United States in Iraq, or the United States in Afghanistan. According to theory, the course of entrapment can only be changed by a new leader, but not by the leader who is responsible for that. So if you look at the Russians at the moment in Ukraine, you might say the Russians are entrapped in that situation, Bakhmut at the moment. But Putin cannot really change course anymore because many people died. It's his responsibility. And if he wants to survive politically, he has to go on. Now, the same was true for Vietnam. And the Democrats, Kennedy, Johnson, they were responsible for that situation. So the only one who take them out was somebody from the Republican Party, being Nixon. Now, you see the same thing in Iraq. So the Republicans were responsible for this Bush, right? The Bushes in a way, but especially, of course, son Bush. And so then you need a new leader, not being a Republican, so Obama being a Democrat, who will be able to take the Americans out. And for example, de Gaulle was not responsible for what happened in Algeria. And so it was de Gaulle who could take the French out of the trap. So entrapment is interesting because you don't see it at the beginning. You think everything is okay. You think I'm more powerful. You use your power and you use your power, but then you get into the swamp. And if you are in a swamp, then you cannot use your power effectively anymore. So there's several of these examples, for example, in military history, where the Brits twice won over the French nobility, like in Azincourt, etc., because of the environment, because of the way they used the landscape. And so the French were much more powerful, better weapons, etc., but they lost. So these kind of things we might call entrapment. And it's a gradual process. You don't see the tunnel at the beginning. It's fuzzy. And the moment you see that you are entering the tunnel, it's too late.
Is violence an intrinsic, as in military action, maybe that's a better way of saying it, is military action intrinsic to the concept of entrapment? Is it an aspect or no?
No, you can also use the negotiation. After all, negotiation and war are two sides of the same coin. And the question is, which one are you going to use? So yeah, well, look at Sun Tzu. These kind of ideas. What Sun Tzu says, for example, and it's linked to entrapment. Sun Tzu says, what is strategy, he asks. And the answer is, his answer, strategy is to change a situation in such a way that it will be right for your victory.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, in diplomatic terms, that there are situations where negotiation doesn't help because the problem, the conflict, is still there. If you change the context, then a negotiation might be successful. Let me take an example, Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
So Cyprus, there was a chance to maybe reunify Cyprus a few years ago. Why? Because they found gas, etc., south of Cyprus. And it was in the interest of the Turks in the north to be part of the revenues there. And it was in the interest of Erdogan to work on that because he lost possibilities to get energy from Syria, etc. So that this was a good alternative. And so he was willing, if there would be a pipeline running to mainland Turkey, he was willing to help reunifying Cyprus. In the end, the Greeks didn't want it, for obvious reasons, because they didn't want a unified Cyprus where the Turks would have a lot of impact, and now they are sovereign and they can do whatever they want to, and then they have to take into account the Turkish minority. But we came very close, and the Americans wanted to exploit those fields. So the Americans put pressure on the UK and said to the UK, you have 2 sovereign bases on Cyprus under the Crown. We want you to give up 50% of the territory of those bases because we want a deal, we want to put an end to the Cyprus crisis because we want to get the money from the gas fields and so on. That was a moment where there was a context change, and therefore negotiation might have been successful, and it failed. So you can negotiate whatever you want to, but if the source of the crisis is still the same, it's extremely difficult to get to any kind of outcome.
What's the most interesting or complex negotiation you've ever been involved in?
Russian Duma members and Chechen leadership.
Oh my, you were involved in that?
Yeah, well, the Americans organized Search for Common Ground, organized meetings, and one of the meetings was in the Peace Palace in The Hague. And so the Chechen leadership came in, Maskhadov and the others, I mean, really, the top. On the other hand, there were Russian Duma members who wanted to know what are the possibilities after the first Chechen war to come to some kind of, living together in one way or another. This is before the second Chechen war. So Russian Duma members came, Chechens came to Rotterdam airport, refused to show their Russian passports. They had Russian passports because, and there were stamps, visa stamps in it from the Dutch consulate in Kiev. But they didn't want to show the passports because they said we are not Russians. So our former Prime Minister Lubbers, he took a cab and he went to the Rotterdam airport and he said to the border guards, we know that they got visa in Kiev, so you don't need to look at it anymore. So then Chechen leadership came in and we had the first round, and it was about 1 hour, and the Chechens told the Russians about the atrocities. Because negotiation, it has been said, is about interest. It's not only about interest. It's also about emotion. Mm-hmm. Is it in the Russian interest really to invade Ukraine? Or is it emotion because you want to restore the East Slavic realm under your control? In many cases, things can only be explained by these kind of ideas that are maybe not realistic at all. So Chechens told the Russians, we suffered so much. You have to know that. You have to acknowledge that. It's important for us, like what the Armenians asked from the Turks on the genocide.
Yep.
And then Bill Urey, of the famous book, Getting to Yes of Fisher and Urey, he was chairing the meeting. And after 1 hour, he said, well, this is enough, now we should talk business. Much too early, much too early. And see, the emotional dimension spoiled the whole negotiation process. And after 2 days, we were nowhere. And then we had dinner. And Lubbers had to go somewhere, and he asked me chair the dinner or whatever. And I thought, I have to change the context a bit. And somebody once gave me something from Delft Blue, it was a completely kitsch thing. Mm-hmm. And I had it in my house. I thought, you know what I do? I pack it, and I take it with me, and I give it to Maskhadov at the beginning of the dinner. For the first time, all the Chechens took off their hats, put them down. Maskhadov stood up, embraced me, said that he was very grateful for the present, and he invited me to come to Chechnya. And it was a pity, he said, that he was not able to give me a Caucasian dagger because it was not allowed on the plane. Acknowledgement. And that is sometimes extremely difficult. Let me give you one more example, if I may, about Armenia
Please.
and Turkey. So being in Armenia, I went with Armenian friends to the Genocide Hill monument on the hill, and you overlook, you see Turkey, etc., and Ararat. And I said to them, listen, Erdogan proposed to you at that time to install a committee of academics, historians from both sides to look at the past. Because at the moment, the past overshadows the present, and therefore you cannot have a common future with Turkey. Well, it's very important to have a common future with Turkey. And this was after the First Karabakh War. And we later on saw that Turkey and so on is connected again to the second one. I said, no way. We know what happened. And we are not going to discuss our trauma with those who killed our ancestors. No negotiation possible, not even a dialogue like between the French and the Germans. You go nowhere.
How influenced, and this is my final question, how influenced are negotiations by the personal, what the individual brings to the table?
Okay, I'll give you one example. About Prodi, who was the president of the commission, but before that, professor in Italy.
Yeah, that's right.
And he has been interviewed after he went back to Italy. And he said, I never imagined, as a professor of history in Italy, that the characters and the experiences of the leaders have such an impact on the content of the agreements. And this is illustrated by one accident, you might say, one anecdote, and then I stop. The Italians at a certain moment had the presidency of the European Union, and Silvio Berlusconi went on the second day of the Italian presidency to the European Parliament and delivered a speech. But he had a problem with Mr. Schulz, the president of the European Parliament. And so he said, you, Mr. Schulz, his name is Schulz, but he's Italian Schulz, you would be perfect as an actor in an Italian movie we are shooting at the moment. You would be perfect in the role, and it's a movie about concentration camps. And you would be perfect for the role of capo. Then what you get is complete silence, more silent and silent, in the European Parliament, and then parliamentarians start to shout, boo, boo, boo. And you see Fini, the Prime Minister, or Minister of Foreign Affairs, sitting next to Berlusconi doing this. Oh my God, what a disaster, how bad. Now at the time, Italian presidency should send the draft constitution of the European Union to the member states. But the leaders, Chirac, Blair, Schröder, they were so angry at Silvio Berlusconi that they said, we are not going to allow you, whatever you do in the coming 6 months, to send the draft constitution to the member states. And then at the end of the 6 months, there was a last meeting in a very small room, and they invited Berlusconi, and so the leaders of the 3 big countries were there. And there's an account of a British diplomat who says, I'm not a fan of Mr. Berlusconi, but the way he has been treated there in that room by President Chirac, that was monstrous. That was really very bad. So things happen behind closed doors, as we know, that we cannot see it, but it can be really very, very bad. So that was the end of the Italian presidency. And because of what Berlusconi said, there was no content at the end. And now I'm coming to Ireland. After that is the Irish presidency. On the second day of the Irish presidency, the Irish were allowed to send a draft constitution to the member states.
And
the impact of the leader on the agreement.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and your insights. They were extraordinarily interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.